Imagine, for a moment, that you are slowly walking through the silent streets of ancient Rome, but not the Rome from school textbooks or the polished images found in tourist guides' gleaming marble columns, gladiators posing for photos, and wide-eyed travelers. No, I'm talking about a much deeper Rome, a darker, more real version of the city, a living, breathing place, shrouded in secrets that, for centuries, have resisted the erosion of time, the claws of political interest, and the hunger for power, from generations that did everything possible to conceal what was never meant to see the light of day. Yes, Rome is not just what physically survived the ruins of the Colosseum or the archaeological forums visited by millions every year. Rome is, above all, what was hidden, silenced, buried beneath layers of earth, stone, and forgetfulness. Because believe me, not even the most powerful empire in history could completely erase the traces of those who dared to walk forbidden paths, challenge the boundaries of human knowledge, and leave behind marks that still watch us to this day, discreetly through symbols, rituals, and legends that sound like myths, but carry within them the essence of unsettling truths. And it is precisely about these secrets, these forgotten, buried, and censored stories that we will speak today. But before we move forward, I need you to be prepared, because this will not be a comfortable or superficial journey. Quite the opposite, it will be a deep, unsettling dive that will shake your beliefs and place you face to face with versions of history you may have never imagined. And by the end, perhaps you'll realize that Rome was, in fact, much more than just a military or political empire. Rome was and still is a vast enigma, a colossal chessboard of mysteries carefully disguised beneath the polished veneer of official history. Have you ever wondered, for instance, who truly held power in Rome? Was it really the emperors so often celebrated in statues and busts, or were there hidden forces, discreet societies that, from the shadows, steered the course of the empire, deciding wars, alliances, and betrayals long before any decree was etched in bronze? And what about the Colosseum, the ultimate symbol of Roman strength? Was it truly just an entertainment arena, or could it have been the stage for obscure rituals, unknown to the majority, but essential to maintaining a power that went far beyond brute strength or military might? And those Roman roads, admired for their monumental engineering, do you really believe they were merely transport routes? What if I told you that many of them were laid out according to astronomical and spiritual patterns, forming a vast symbolic network that connected not only territories, but also beliefs, rituals, and knowledge that very few today can even begin to comprehend? And that's not even mentioning the cult of Mithras, the secret religion of Roman soldiers whose underground temples still hold unsolved enigmas to this day, or the forbidden manuscripts burned or hidden containing knowledge so powerful that they threatened the very structure of Christianized Rome. Yes, dear viewer, what you are about to hear are stories most people can't even imagine, narratives left out of history classes and often deliberately erased so that a more digestible, more controllable version of events could be passed on to future generations. But the truth, as always, insists on surviving. It resurfaces in fragments of stone, in hidden symbols, in whispered words that slipped past the censors, in bold archaeologists, and in historians who dared to look beyond the obvious. And maybe that's exactly what fascinates us so much about Rome, the certainty that no matter how deep we dig, no matter how much we investigate, there will always be something more, something hidden, something lying just beneath our feet or behind a wall, waiting to be discovered by those who, like you, have the courage to question, to dive deeper, and to reject easy answers. That's why, on this journey, I won't just narrate facts, I'll guide you through the veils that shroud the most well-kept secrets of ancient Rome, revealing block by block, layer by layer, what so many have tried to bury forever. Prepare yourself to discover the Collegium Arcanum, the secret society that may have ruled Rome more than the emperors themselves. Get ready to understand the true function of the Colosseum, to uncover the hidden maps of Roman roads, to enter the mysteries of the Mithraic cult, to rethink the causes of Rome's downfall, and to be stunned by the lost manuscripts and forgotten symbols that still echo, silently, through the millennia-old ruins of the Eternal City. But before we begin, allow me one final provocation. How many of these secrets do you truly want to know? How many of these mysteries are you prepared to accept as part of Rome's true history? Because once the curtain lifts, there is no turning back. Once you see the Rome few have dared to reveal, you'll never be able to look at its ruins the same way again. So if you've accepted this invitation, take a deep breath and come with me. Our journey through the lost secrets of ancient Rome begins now. Little is said and even less is truly known about what actually kept the vast and intricate machinery of the Roman Empire running. For centuries, it dominated peoples, territories, and minds, and its grandeur could not have been sustained merely by the brute strength of its legions or the charisma of its emperors. Behind the imposing statues and well-trained armies, there existed a group of society as discreet as it was powerful, whose members wore neither armor nor crowns but who, silently, shaped the fate of the empire. The Collegium Arcanum, unlike the societies that would emerge centuries later, like the Enlightenment thinkers or even the Freemasons, the Collegium Arcanum did not seek public recognition or overt influence. On the contrary, its strength lay precisely in its anonymity and its ability to manipulate without leaving traces, to suggest without imposing, to guide without ever being seen. It acted as a kind of invisible conscience of the empire, steering strategic decisions, advising emperors, and, when possible, preventing disasters that could threaten the integrity of Rome. But who were these people? What were their origins? And perhaps more importantly, why did they choose to operate from the shadows, avoiding exposure and embracing an existence marked by absolute secrecy? It is believed that the Collegium emerged around the 1st century BCE, at a critical moment, when Rome was beginning to transition from a republic into an empire under Augustus. The violent and betrayal-filled political transition awakened, within certain sectors of the intellectual elite, the conviction that beyond official power, there needed to be a nucleus dedicated to preserving the true Roman spirit, a group that would safeguard specific knowledge and traditions that could otherwise be forgotten or destroyed amidst political chaos and civil wars. This nucleus was formed by a combination of priests, Stoic philosophers, engineers, mathematicians, and military strategists, all deeply committed to the idea of Rome as a spiritual entity, beyond its physical or territorial manifestations. The Collegium believed that the empire was, above all, an idea, and that this idea must be defended at all costs, even if that meant opposing the interests of emperors or senators. The Collegium's meetings took place in carefully selected locations, beneath basilicas, in hidden chambers within aqueducts, in crypts under temples, and according to some bolder accounts even in distant caves outside the city limits of Rome. There, they could carry out their rituals and deliberations without the risk of being intercepted or spied upon. These meetings always occurred at night, lit by torches and candles. They were not only used to discuss military or political strategies, but also held initiation ceremonies where new members underwent character and loyalty trials, and swore an oath of absolute silence regarding everything they witnessed. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Collegium Arcanum was its internal diversity. Contrary to what one might assume, it was not exclusively a male society. Fragmented records suggest that women were also part of the group, particularly those involved in priesthood or in the study of natural sciences and medicine. This female presence, extremely rare in other spheres of Roman power, reveals the unique nature of the society, which valued knowledge above social or gender conventions. The Collegium held knowledge far beyond what could be publicly shared. Fields like alchemy, advanced astrology, construction techniques that surpassed even the known standards of Roman engineering, as well as formulas for creating undetectable poisons and potions capable of inducing altered states of consciousness. These were just part of the repertoire they mastered. Some claim that this group was behind some of the most enigmatic decisions in Roman history, such as Julius Caesar's sudden change of strategy in Gaul or the unexpected retreat of Roman troops in Parthia, events that continue to puzzle historians. To this day, the secrecy of the Collegium was so absolute that for centuries, almost nothing was known about its existence. Only recently, thanks to archaeological discoveries in places like the catacombs of San Callisto and the underground chambers of the Domus Aurea, have clues to its presence begun to emerge. Encrypted inscriptions, complex geometric symbols that don't match the official religious or military iconography of Rome, but that, when analyzed together, seem to form a true coda map for those who know how to read it. One such symbol is the so-called inverted trident, a figure found in various crypts that, according to some experts, represented the triple domain the Collegium sought to master: the physical world, the spiritual world, and the political world. These three spheres, in the society's view, had to remain in balance to ensure the stability of Rome. When that balance was threatened, it was up to the Collegium to act, and acting could mean anything from secretly advising the emperor to, in more extreme cases, orchestrating his removal, whether through exile or more drastic means. And here we reach one of the most delicate and controversial aspects of the Collegium Arcanum. Did this society participate in conspiracies to overthrow or assassinate emperors? Well, it's impossible to say for sure. There are historically grounded theories suggesting this possibility. The sudden death of Caligula, for example, or the fall of Nero, commonly attributed to military coups or public dissatisfaction, might, in fact, have been orchestrated by members of the Collegium, who were concerned about the moral and political degradation caused by these rulers and, more importantly, the existential threat that such decay posed to the survival of the empire as a whole. Another fascinating element is the Collegium's role in Rome's territorial expansion. Far from simply following the emperor's orders, many Roman generals were, according to some accounts, quietly guided by members of the society. They were advised on the best invasion routes, the most opportune moments to strike, and especially the places where battles should be avoided. These strategies were based not only on military intelligence, but also on astrological calculations and religious interpretations meant to secure the favor of the gods. It is precisely here that one of the Collegium's greatest strengths and also one of its greatest mysteries comes into focus: its ability to seamlessly merge rational, scientific knowledge with spiritual and mystical dimensions. For its members, these two realms were not opposites, but complements, and only the deep understanding of both could ensure the true greatness of Rome. However, like any society bold enough to manipulate the invisible threads of power, the Collegium Arcanum also made enemies. With the rise of Christianity and the gradual conversion of Rome to the new faith, many of the values and practices upheld by the Collegium came to be seen as heretical and dangerous, and were thus persecuted. Numerous accounts exist of members who mysteriously disappeared or were accused of conspiracy and executed under false pretenses. Little by little, this society, one that had so profoundly contributed to Rome's rise, was silenced, until eventually it remained only as a whisper, a muted rumor buried beneath ancient stones and the censored pages of history. And now, faced with this fascinating picture, I ask you, was the Collegium Arcanum truly extinguished, or did it survive, adapted, perhaps disguised in other forms, still influencing the world, just as it did 2,000 years ago, though now under even more sophisticated veils? As we reflect on that possibility, we move forward to the next hidden secret of ancient Rome, which, as you've already begun to see, is far vaster, more complex, and more mysterious than we were ever led to believe. When people think of the Colosseum, the image that immediately forms in most minds is that of a grand arena where gladiators, wild beasts, and condemned criminals fought under the excited gaze of a crowd thirsty for blood and spectacle. As if that colossal stone structure had been built solely to serve popular entertainment and to reinforce combat after combat Rome's supremacy and merciless dominance over its subjects and enemies. However, the true function of the Colosseum, or rather, the multiple functions it fulfilled over the centuries, is infinitely more complex and darker than what traditional historical narratives insist on telling. The Flavian Amphitheater, as it was originally named, was not merely an arena. It was a theater of power, a ritualistic platform, a hidden temple where ceremonies were held that went far beyond public displays of violence. According to certain unorthodox archaeological and historical perspectives, these ceremonies involved spiritual and magical practices carefully concealed beneath the guise of ordinary spectacles. The monumental architecture of the Colosseum, with its dozens of corridors, galleries, and underground chambers, seems to have been designed not only for logistical purposes to move animals and fighters, but also as a true esoteric labyrinth, a symbolic and functional structure capable of hosting secret rituals, completely beyond the understanding of the masses who watch the surface spectacle in awe. Those who have dared to explore the lower levels of the Colosseum know that beneath the blood-soaked sand of the arena lies the hypogeum, a complex system of tunnels, rooms, and mechanisms. This subterranean network was used not only for technical preparations but, according to some interpretations, also for consecration rituals and sacrificial rites meant to invoke protection from divine entities, many of them pre-Roman, linked to the city's foundational myths or to foreign cults assimilated by Roman syncretism. Archaeological evidence such as inscriptions, reliefs, and ceremonial object remains suggest that specific sections of the hypogeum were reserved exclusively for these hidden purposes, far from the eyes of the plebs and even from much of the political elite. According to one particularly bold theory, proposed by scholars of symbolic archaeology, The very spatial layout of the Colosseum with its circular design and formaine tiers of seating represented a symbolic model of the cosmos. This design was inspired by Stoic and Pythagorean cosmology, which conceived the universe as composed of concentric circles, hierarchically ordered from the most material to the most spiritual. Thus, the center of the arena, where the fights took place, would represent the earthly plane, the space of human action and the struggle for survival, while the higher tiers corresponded to celestial realms. The uppermost seats, reserved for the emperor and religious authorities, would symbolically represent the divine dominion over the world of men. In this context, the spectacles were not mere displays of strength or entertainment. They were ritualistic enactments designed to reinforce both cosmic and political order. Each execution symbolically reaffirmed the emperor's role as intermediary between the gods and the people, and Rome's capacity to impose harmony through the control of violence. Some go even further, suggesting that in certain moments, especially during solemn or secret ceremonies, the Colosseum transformed into a true temple. Hidden rituals were performed there, allegedly involving initiated priests and possibly even members of the Collegium Arcanum, the secret society that, as we explored in the previous block, may have invisibly influenced the empire's fate. Some accounts claim that, prior to major military campaigns or politically risky decisions, ritual sacrifices were performed deep within the Colosseum to obtain divine protection or to influence fate through magical means. These rituals, sometimes referred to in historical fragments as sacrificia arcana, involved not only the sacrifice of animals, which was common and socially accepted in ancient Rome, but in exceptional cases, also prisoners of war or slaves. Their blood was not spilled as public punishment, but as a secret offering to forces believed to influence the outcomes of Rome's grand designs. The sacred connection of the Colosseum becomes even clearer when we examine the arena's inauguration ceremonies in 80 AD. During the reign of Emperor Titus, massive spectacles were organized, lasting 100 days and resulting in the deaths of thousands of men and animals. To many scholars, this display of power cannot be viewed merely as a gesture to win popular approval or to cement the emperor's legitimacy. Rather, it was a grandiose ritual of consecration, a kind of blood baptism meant to purify and energize the newly built structure, binding it permanently to the supernatural forces believed to support the empire. But the most disturbing and perhaps least known aspect of the Colosseum's hidden functions relates to the worship of chthonic deities, gods of the underworld, death, and regeneration, such as Pluto, Proserpina, and the Furies. There is evidence that during specific periods, particularly in times of political or military crisis, the Colosseum became the stage for ceremonies devoted to these deities, intended to appease their wrath or secure their favor. These ceremonies, of course, were not public events, but held in secret by specialized priesthoods, following astrological and religious calendars with extreme precision. Moreover, some scholars suggest that the very design of the Colosseum allowed for acoustic manipulation, enabling ritual chants and sounds to resonate in specific ways through the underground corridors. This may have had intense psychological effects on ritual participants and on the condemned, who often unknowingly were being led not just to a spectacle of death, but to a broader spiritual sacrifice, where their lives were offered not just to an audience, but to the invisible powers believed to rule Rome from behind the veil of the physical world. Another element reinforcing the idea of the Colosseum's hidden functions is its proximity to other religious and esoteric landmarks in Rome, such as the Temple of Jupiter Capitolinus, the Roman Forum, and, most notably, the subterranean Mithraeum, a temple dedicated to the cult of Mithras, the initiatory and secret religion of Roman soldiers. As we'll explore more in the next block, this cult also employed rituals involving blood, death, and symbolic rebirth. The existence of these sacred spaces, directly or indirectly linked to the Colosseum, suggests that the central area of ancient Rome was, in fact, an enormous ritual complex where official and occult religious practices intertwined, intricately forming a spiritual network that sustained the empire's social and political order. And now, confronted with this revelation, we must ask, how aware were the spectators packed into the Colosseum stands that, while watching the games, they were actually part of a much grander, deeper, and more complex performance, one that transcended mere entertainment and made them, even unconsciously, participants in a collective rite meant to reaffirm and perpetuate the supremacy of Rome. We may never know the full extent of these hidden practices, For like all esoteric traditions, they were veiled in secrecy and passed only among initiates. They left behind few written records and relied mostly on oral tradition and the enduring power of symbols. Yet the surviving traces, the clues that defied time and deliberate erasure, allow us to say, with reasonable certainty, that the Colosseum was far more than a simple arena. It was a ritual epicenter, a sacred and profane space where Rome celebrated not only its strength, but also its fears, its beliefs, and above all, its unwavering need to control at all costs the visible and invisible forces that govern the world. And so, with this new perspective on the Colosseum, I invite you to move forward to uncover another of ancient Rome's hidden secrets, the mysterious roads that connected the empire not only geographically, but spiritually, through astronomical alignments and coded messages decipherable only to the initiated few. When people speak of Roman roads, most immediately think of an extraordinary feat of engineering and military planning, a road system so advanced and durable that many of its routes are still in use today. 2 millennia later, some are incorporated into the urban grids of modern cities, others hidden beneath forests and fields that silently preserve the memory of an empire proud to extend its presence to the furthest corners of the known world. The traditional view teaches us that these roads were built for the swift movement of legions, the facilitation of trade, and the political and administrative integration of conquered provinces. But what few know and fewer still dare to investigate is that beyond their logistical function, many of these roads were traced according to what we might now consider esoteric principles. They were designed not just with the terrain in mind, but also with astronomical and symbolic alignments that reveal a far more complex conception of space and power than mere military efficiency. Indeed, when we analyze the layout of some of the major Roman roads such as the Via Appia, the Via Flaminia, or the Via Augusta, we find that they not only connect strategic points of the empire, but also align, with astonishing precision, to specific celestial events like solstices and equinoxes, or to constellations that were, in antiquity, associated with protective deities of Rome. These alignments, far from accidental, suggest that Roman engineers, many of whom were also priests or astronomers, planned their constructions to establish a direct connection between the earthly and celestial realms, creating a symbolic network that made the empire itself a terrestrial reflection of the cosmic order. To understand the significance of this conception, we must recall that Roman thought heavily influenced by Etruscan and Greek traditions viewed the order of the cosmos as the ideal model to be imitated in human structures, just as the gods had organized the universe according to principles of harmony and proportion. It was the duty of men, especially Romans, who saw themselves as divinely chosen to govern the world, to replicate that order in their cities, temples, and of course, in their roads. Constructing routes aligned with celestial cycles was not merely a symbolic act of devotion, but a concrete way to ensure that Rome remained in harmony with universal forces, receiving from them protection and legitimacy. But the most intriguing aspect of these roads lies not only in their astronomical alignments, but in the possibility that many of them were also used as initiatory or spiritual pathways. They were traversed not just by soldiers or merchants, but by priests, philosophers, and mystics who saw in them a path of purification and access to hidden knowledge. Some fragmentary manuscripts discovered in monastic libraries and archaeological excavations mention, for example, that the Via Appia, known as the Regina Viarum, Queen of Roads, was used at certain times of the year for religious processions stretching across miles, culminating in secret ceremonies held at specific points along the way. Many near sanctuaries or necropolises that remain cloaked in mystery to this day. One such location is the famed catacomb of Saint Sebastian, located along the Via Appia. There, in addition to the well-documented Christian vestiges, we find symbols of pagan and esoteric origin that suggest the site served as a ritual center long before the arrival of Christianity. In chambers carved from rock, initiation ceremonies were held which, according to some scholars, involved astrological practices, symbolic sacrifices, and meditations intended to align the initiate with the cosmic rhythms embodied by the road itself and its precisely oriented path. Another remarkable example is the Via Flaminia, which connects Rome to northern Italy, and according to recent archaeoastronomical studies aligns with the sun's position during the summer solstice. In certain locations along its length, sunlight shines through bridge arches or city gates, creating visual effects of light and shadow that appear to have been deliberately engineered. For ritualistic purposes, it's as if, in passing through these points, the traveler crossed not just a geographic boundary, but entered a symbolic dimension, being consciously or unconsciously guided to reflect on their place in the cosmos and the greater order to which they were subject. We must also remember that the Romans inherited from the Etruscans the practice of templatio, the division of space into quadrants oriented by cardinal points and the movements of the stars. This technique was applied not only in the founding of cities and temples, but also in road construction. Thus, the layout of Roman roads was not determined solely by practical or military criteria, but also by religious and astronomical interpretations intended to align human works with divine will and celestial mechanics. Even more astonishing is the hypothesis defended by some non-mainstream archaeologists that the Roman roads, when viewed as a whole, form a vast hidden map, a network connecting not just geographical points, but also centers of spiritual and esoteric power, creating what could be described today as a form of sacred geometry. According to these interpretations, the network served not only for the physical movement of people and goods, but also for the transmission of secret knowledge, encrypted messages, and rituals that could only be fully understood by those fluent in the symbolic language of the initiated. Some believe that certain mularia, the milestone columns marking distances along Roman roads, contained discrete inscriptions or symbols that acted as esoteric traffic codes, allowing members of secret societies or religious orders to identify meeting places, worship sites, or safe havens, especially during times of persecution or political instability. Though many of these milestones have been destroyed or repurposed over the centuries, some surviving fragments still bear enigmatic markings that resist traditional interpretation. Additionally, it's worth noting that in many ancient cultures, roads were conceived not just as tools of movement, but as metaphors for spiritual journeys, the hero's path, the quest for transformation. In this sense, Roman roads may also be seen as pedagogical and spiritual instruments that guided travelers not only across the empire, but into deeper states of self-awareness and cosmic integration, reinforcing Roman identity not merely as citizenship, but as a spiritual mission. Finally, we must mention the impact this symbolic view of roads had on the very expansion of the empire, by establishing routes based not only on geopolitical logic, but also on astronomical and religious principles. Rome didn't just conquer land, it spiritually integrated conquered peoples. It imposed a presence that was both physical and symbolic, felt far beyond the reach of legions or political institutions. Thus, the Roman road became more than just a means of transportation, it was a tool of romanization, a channel through which not only material goods, but also ideas, values, and symbols were transmitted, gradually reshaping the cultural landscape of the ancient world. And now, as we contemplate this complex, multifaceted network that blended engineering, spirituality, and power, we are led to acknowledge that Rome was not just a territorial empire, it was, perhaps above all, a symbolic empire, one that skillfully used its roads as lines of force to shape not only space, but also the minds and souls of all who willingly or not became part of its orbit. With this new perspective on the Roman roads, we continue onward to uncover yet another of ancient Rome's hidden secrets, the enigmatic cult of Mithras, the religion of soldiers and initiates whose mysteries still resist the ravages of time and the grasp of historical oblivion. Amidst the vast and chaotic pantheon of gods and cults that flourished under the banner of the Roman Empire, few were as shrouded in mystery and at the same time so deeply rooted in the souls of their followers as the cult of Mithras. This secret, initiatory religion found, especially among Roman soldiers, not merely a space for devotion but a true way of life, a practical and spiritual philosophy that, discreetly and steadfastly, resisted time, obscurity, and, later, the systematic persecution imposed by triumphant Christianity. Unlike the public, ostentatious cults that filled the forums and temples of Rome with processions, sacrifices, and festivals in honor of gods like Jupiter, Mars, or Venus, the cult of Mithras was practiced in the shadows and hidden places, often underground, known as Mithraea. Here, initiates gathered not only to venerate the solar and warrior god, but to engage in complex rituals of initiation and communion that profoundly shaped their identities and destinies. These temples, usually built beneath common buildings or carved into natural caves, were decorated with a peculiar and symbolic iconography, dominated by the central image of Mithras slaying the primordial bull, the Tauroctonius scene that not only illustrated the myth of the cult, but also encoded a deep cosmogony and spiritual path that each initiate was called to walk. The origin of Mithraic worship traces back to Indo-Persian traditions, where Mithra was a deity associated with light, justice, and contracts. But as the cult was assimilated into Roman culture, the god took on new attributes, becoming a distinctly martial, solar figure, a mediator between humans and the divine, and, above all, a model of virtue, strength, and discipline qualities that deeply resonated with Roman soldiers, accustomed to the harshness of military campaigns and the ever-present need to maintain cohesion and loyalty within the ranks. Not coincidentally, the cult of Mithra spread rapidly along the empire's borders, following the movements of the legions and taking root especially in remote and inhospitable regions where the presence of a strong, secret spiritual bond was often the only resource capable of maintaining troop morale and unity. The Mithria found in Britannia, Germania, and Dacia are silent witnesses to this phenomenon, revealing through their inscriptions and reliefs a network of devotion that transcended geographical, linguistic, and cultural boundaries, uniting soldiers from diverse backgrounds under a common spiritual ideal. But what made this cult so appealing and, at the same time, so secretive? The answer likely lies in its initiatory and hierarchical structure, which provided its members not only with a religious identity but also with a sense of belonging and spiritual progression lacking in public cults. The Mithraic initiate did not simply offer tribute or perform periodic sacrifices. He embarked on a demanding path that required trials, challenges, and personal transformations, progressing through 7 grades or stages from Raven to Father, each marked by specific rituals, secret teachings, and symbols encoding deep aspects of Mithraic doctrine. These grades, understood as stages in a process of inner transformation, not only reinforced group cohesion, but also provided soldiers with a psychological and spiritual framework that granted them strength, courage, and resilience in the face of battlefield adversity and military life. Thus, Mithraic practice was not merely a religious routine, but a true training of the soul, a constant preparation for the confrontation with death, an ever-present reality for soldiers, and for transcending human limitations in pursuit of heroism and spiritual ascent. Mithraic rituals, though veiled in secrecy and leaving behind no explicit written records, making their reconstruction a challenging task, for historians are known through the rich iconography preserved in the Mithria and through indirect references by ancient authors. It is known, for instance, that these rites included purification baths, ritual meals that reenacted the mythical supper of Mithras with the Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, and symbolic reenactments of Mithra's battle against the primordial bull. An act considered the origin of life and the cosmos. The bull's death, far from being seen as gratuitous violence, was interpreted as a necessary sacrifice from its spilled blood sprang plants, animals, and the cycles of nature. It was a powerful and dramatic portrayal of the interdependence between life and death, between sacrifice and creation. Participating in such a ritual was not simply witnessing a mythological reenactment, but experiencing intensely and personally the ultimate foundations of existence and human destiny. Another fascinating aspect of Mithraism is its relationship with astronomy and astrology. Many scholars interpret Mithraic iconography as a coded representation of the zodiac and constellations, suggesting that the cult did not merely worship a solar deity, but also taught its initiates a sophisticated cosmology based on the observation of the stars and the understanding of cosmic cycles. In this sense, Mithraic rituals can also be seen as exercises in harmonizing the human microcosm with the celestial macrocosm, reinforcing the ancient belief that man is a reflection of the universe and that his life must be aligned with cosmic laws. Despite its depth and spiritual richness, Mithraism became a target of systematic persecution starting in the 4th century AD, as ascendant Christianity sought to eliminate doctrinal competition and unify the empire under a single religion. Many Mithria were destroyed or converted into churches. Images of Mithras were replaced with crosses. Initiates were dispersed or forced to convert, and the rituals were banned and condemned as pagan and heretical practices. Yet the physical destruction did not fully erase the deep mark Mithraism left on Roman and, by extension, Western culture. Elements of its iconography, rituals, and doctrines can still be traced in esoteric and initiatory traditions that survived Rome's fall, whether in medieval military orders, in the Hermetic and alchemical schools of the Renaissance, or, according to some theories, in the symbolic frameworks of Freemasonry and other modern secret societies. Thus, the cult of Mithras remains one of ancient Rome's greatest enigmas, a religion that not only offered soldiers a spiritual path and a profound sense of identity, but also challenged the official power structures by proposing an alternative vision of the cosmos and human life, one grounded in sacrifice, initiation, and the relentless pursuit of harmony with universal forces. And now, with this new understanding of what transpired beneath the empire's surface, we move on to yet another of Rome's lost secrets. The true cause of its fall, was it really due to external collapse, or was it an internal betrayal that corroded the empire from within? Few events in human history have sparked as many interpretations, debates, and above all constructed and deconstructed narratives over the centuries as the fall of the Roman Empire. For many, it was an inevitable collapse resulting from relentless barbarian invasions, the moral corruption of a decadent elite, and the economic failure of a model that could no longer sustain itself. For others, it was a gradual transformation, a historical metamorphosis that, rather than a tragic end, marked the birth of a new era, the Middle Ages. However, there is a third path, a less widespread yet increasingly considered hypothesis among revisionist historians, that Rome's downfall was, above all, an act of internal betrayal, a silent sabotage led by those who were supposed to be its most loyal defenders. For centuries, the official narrative has presented the so-called barbarian invasions as the decisive factor in the empire's fall. Alaric's Visigoths sacking Rome in 410 AD, the Vandals crossing the Mediterranean to plunder Carthage, Attila's Huns threatening the eastern borders. These episodes are often cited as undeniable proof of Rome's inability to defend its territory against external pressure. However, a closer examination reveals that, in many cases, the borders were not simply breached by brute force but deliberately opened by Roman generals and senators who, for personal gain, political discontent, or sheer ambition, facilitated or even encouraged the advance of the so-called barbarian peoples. Take, for example, the case of Flavius Stilicho, a Roman general of Vandal origin, and one of the most powerful figures in the Western Roman Empire in the late 4th and early 5th centuries, responsible for several military victories, and considered by many to be the last great defender of the empire. Stilicho was eventually accused of conspiring with the very barbarians he was supposed to fight. His downfall involved a complex web of family alliances, power plays, and hidden interests that remain shrouded in mystery to this day. His execution in 408 AD, for many historians, was not just the end of a political career, but the spark that led to the sack of Rome by the Visigoths 2 years later, in an event that symbolically marked the beginning of the end for the empire. Another emblematic case is that of Odoacer, the Germanic military leader who, in 476 AD, deposed the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, without encountering significant resistance from Roman forces. What this episode reveals is not a military defeat in the strict sense, but a quiet transfer of power, almost consensual, as if, by that point, a significant portion of the Roman elite had already accepted or even welcomed the end of the imperial model, recognizing that maintaining a vast and costly territorial empire no longer served their political or economic interests. These episodes, among many others, suggest that the fall of Rome was not merely a passive or external process. It was, to a large extent, an active one, driven by betrayals, sabotage, and covert negotiations. Members of the imperial elite themselves, whether consciously or not, played a role in dismantling the very structures that had sustained the empire for centuries. And here, once again, we encounter the shadows of secret societies and hidden power, circles operating beneath the surface of the Roman world. Some bold scholars propose that the Collegium Arcanum, the secret society that, as we have seen, guided Rome's political and military decisions, may have played an ambiguous role in this process. Upon recognizing the inevitability of collapse, or perhaps judging that the imperial system had become irreversibly corrupt, members of the Collegium may have chosen to hasten the end, seeking to preserve, in discreet and protected enclaves, the knowledge, rituals, and traditions they deemed more valuable than the political structure of the empire itself. This hypothesis gains traction when one considers the relatively orderly way in which many Roman centers of knowledge were preserved or transferred even after the so-called barbarian invasions. Libraries, philosophical schools, religious centers, and administrative archives were, in several cases, carefully hidden, relocated, or entrusted to groups that, despite not being Roman, showed respect for Roman culture and governance. As the political structure of Rome disintegrated, many of its cultural, religious, and administrative elements were subtly absorbed by the barbarian peoples, becoming, within a few centuries, the foundation of what would emerge as medieval Europe. Another clue pointing to internal involvement is the proliferation, in the empire's final decades, of dubious alliances between Roman generals and barbarian chieftains, often sealed through marriages, secret treaties, or territorial concessions made without Senate or imperial consent. These alliances, forged for short-term personal gain, ultimately weakened Rome's political and military base, fragmented its power, and eroded trust among the factions that comprised the imperial elite. Moreover, we cannot ignore the role played by the Christianization of the empire, a phenomenon that, while providing Rome with a new ideological foundation, also contributed to the dismantling of its traditional institutions and the marginalization of religious practices that had once been central to the empire's spiritual and social cohesion. The banning of pagan cults, destruction of temples, and persecution of ancient traditions alienated many within the Roman elite still deeply tied to classical values, and created internal divisions that weakened Rome's ability to resist external threats. The replacement of traditional Roman religiosity with a rigid Christian orthodoxy, often imposed through violence and intolerance, led not only to open conflict, such as religious wars and heretic persecutions, but also to a quiet resentment, a loss of collective identity that, according to some scholars, played a crucial role in the empire's unraveling. After all, Rome had always been defined by its ability to integrate and assimilate diverse cultures, yet suddenly found itself constrained by a worldview that sought uniformity and repressed difference. And so, when Romulus Augustulus was deposed in 476 AD and the Western Empire officially came to an end, what fell was not merely a political entity but an entire model of civilization, a civilization that, rotting from within and betrayed by those who benefited most from it, could no longer resist its own decay. But perhaps, and this is the most unsettling thought, Rome never truly fell. Perhaps, as some theorists argue, it merely changed shape, transmuted its structures and symbols, and perpetuated itself through institutions that, though renamed, continued to perform the same functions once carried out by the empire. Roman law, administrative organization, architecture, even the very idea of empire, all these elements survived, reappearing in various contexts, from the Catholic Church to medieval empires, to modern nation-states that, consciously or not, still reproduce many of the paradigms Rome established 2,000 years ago. And thus, when we contemplate the fall of Rome not as an external collapse, but as an internal process of betrayal, sabotage, and transformation, we are invited to rethink not only the history of the past, but our very understanding of power, civilization, and identity. And with that provocation, we continue our journey through the hidden secrets of ancient Rome, now entering the realm of lost manuscripts, censored knowledge, and forbidden texts that, if rediscovered, could revolutionize everything we know about this civilization. The history of ancient Rome is, without question, that of an empire proud of its rationality, its administrative capability, its monumental engineering, and its sophisticated cultural production. But what is rarely said and even less often investigated is how much of this legacy was intentionally erased, silenced, or manipulated, not by the inexorable passage of time, as is often conveniently claimed, but by deliberate political and religious decisions aimed at shaping collective memory, hiding certain forms of knowledge, and imposing a single, simplified, and convenient narrative for the new powers emerging from the ashes of the empire. When we think of lost manuscripts, popular imagination tends to recall dramatic events like the burning of the Library of Alexandria, often cited as the ultimate symbol of the destruction of ancient knowledge. Yet we forget, or are led to forget, that Rome, over the course of its long existence, amassed a bibliographic, philosophical, scientific, and spiritual heritage that may have rivaled or even surpassed that legendary library. And with the fall of the empire and the progressive Christianization of Roman society, much of that collection was systematically destroyed or hidden, deemed dangerous or heretical by the new guardians of orthodoxy. At the height of its glory, Rome was a cosmopolitan city where diverse philosophical schools, Stoics, Epicureans, skeptics, Neoplatonists, often coexisted in tension, alongside centers for medical and astronomical research. legal and administrative archives of astonishing complexity, military treatises condensing centuries of warfare experience, and religious texts documenting the rites, myths, and spiritual practices of a multitude of cults, many originating from the empire's most remote regions. Over time, however, this vast corpus of knowledge became the object of suspicion and persecution. As Christianity evolved from a persecuted sect to the official religion, the Edict of Thessalonica in 380 AD made Christian faith mandatory, and banned pagan worship. What followed was a meticulous and systematic campaign of cultural censorship, led not only by religious authorities, but also by political powers, seeking to consolidate the new spiritual order and eliminate traces of older beliefs that might threaten the ideological unity deemed essential for the survival of a Christianized empire. Entire libraries were emptied or burned, temples were turned into churches or reduced to rubble, and manuscripts considered incompatible with the new doctrine were destroyed or hidden in secret locations, accessible only to a few initiated individuals. Among the most targeted forms of knowledge were treatises on natural philosophy and magic works that explored the relationship between humanity and the hidden forces of nature, which, from a Christian perspective, were considered dangerous heresies or even demonic practices. Texts on alchemy, advanced astrology, and holistic medicine, which integrated body, soul, and cosmos, were especially persecuted, as they challenged the Christian worldview of a universe divided between the spiritual and the material, threatening the Church's monopoly on interpreting the order of the universe. A paradigmatic example is the Corpus Hermeticum, a set of texts attributed to Hermes Trismegistus that circulated widely in the Roman world and articulated a deeply spiritualized vision of the cosmos, merging philosophy, theology, science, and magic into an inseparable unity. Although part of the corpus survived thanks to copies preserved in Neoplatonic circles and rediscovered during the Renaissance, many other Hermetic texts, especially those that contained ritual instructions or advanced scientific insights, were deliberately destroyed or suppressed by ecclesiastical censors. But it wasn't only esoteric writings that came under attack. Even technical or scientific works that could challenge theological authority were proscribed or hidden. Archaeological evidence points to the existence, in some Roman villas, of engineering and architectural treatises documenting advanced construction techniques, including materials and formulas whose secrets have since been lost. That may help explain the extraordinary durability of Roman structures like aqueducts and roads that have withstood the wear of millennia. Medicine was another, particularly affected field. The Roman medical tradition, heavily influenced by Greek knowledge, had developed surgical, pharmaceutical, and therapeutic practices of a high standard. Many of these were recorded in manuals and treatises that were later deemed incompatible with the Christian idea of illness as divine punishment or as a mystery beyond human reason. As a result, countless medical texts were destroyed or hidden, and much of their knowledge would only be rediscovered or reinvented centuries later. In a slow and fragmented process of recovery, beyond direct destruction, another effective tool of censorship was selective historical rewriting, the reinterpretation or alteration of existing texts to conform to the new orthodoxy. A notorious example is found in the works of Roman historians who documented in rich detail the diversity of cults and religious practices throughout the empire. Many of these writings were only partially copied, with entire sections omitted or modified to conceal elements deemed unacceptable by the Christian faith. Thus, not only was a material collection lost, but a vital dimension of Rome's historical memory was also erased, undermining our ability to fully understand the cultural complexity of the empire. Perhaps the most intriguing and least explored aspect of this censorship is the existence of secret archives, collections of manuscripts deliberately hidden by those who, fully aware of the overwhelming force of the new religious order, chose to preserve fragments of ancient knowledge in concealed locations, hoping that one day they might be rediscovered and returned to humanity. Though fragmentary and controversial, some accounts mention the existence of underground repositories in cities such as Rome, Ravenna, and Alexandria, where valuable texts were stored and protected by complex systems of passwords and traps designed to deter intruders. Some of these archives may have been rediscovered over the centuries, fueling the revival of esoteric and intellectual traditions that repeatedly challenged the Church's ideological monopoly, such as medieval alchemy, Renaissance, Hermeticism, and even modern science, which often traces its roots to recovered fragments of ancient wisdom. Others, however, may still lie buried, awaiting someone with the courage and insight to decode the clues pointing to their location and bring to light knowledge that could once again revolutionize our understanding of history and of human potential. And so, as we contemplate the phenomenon of the lost manuscripts, we are forced to reflect on the power of censorship not merely as a destructive force, but as a tool for shaping memory and collective identity. The Rome we know is, in large part, the Rome that survived censorship. But how many other Romes, how many other ways of knowing, how many other possible worlds were silenced, buried, or erased by that quiet and relentless process? And with that unsettling question, we move on to the next hidden secret of ancient Rome, the forgotten symbols, the secret language of the ruins that, even after millennia, continues to call to us in silence, waiting for us to learn how to read it again. Walking through the ruins of Rome is, for most people, an aesthetic and historical experience and opportunity to contemplate, with reverence or admiration, the grand remnants of a civilization that, though distant, continues to captivate the contemporary imagination. But what many visitors don't realize, and what even the most scholarly tour guides may never dare to reveal, is that these ruins, beyond their architectural grandeur, are also a text, a silent and enigmatic book written in a language few are still able to decipher, the language of forgotten symbols. Over centuries, Roman builders, sculptors, architects, and priests inscribed into stone, mosaics, reliefs, and murals a profusion of signs, images, and codes that served not merely decorative purposes, but ritualistic, political, spiritual, and initiatory functions. These symbols were simultaneously marks of belonging, tools of power, and vehicles for transmitting hidden knowledge not meant for the superficial gaze of the crowds, but for the trained and attentive eyes of the initiates, who could read, in the folds of the stone or the carved figures, the encoded messages directed at them. A paradigmatic example of this symbolic language can be found in the Roman Forum, the political and religious heart of the city, where among the toppled columns and marble fragments lie inscriptions and bas-reliefs that at first appear ornamental but are in fact authentic diagrams of power and spirituality. The image of the Capitoline wolf nursing Romulus and Remus, so familiar to students of Rome's foundational myth, is not just an evocative representation of legend, but, according to some interpretations, an astronomical and initiatory symbol associated with the constellation of the she-wolf and the concept of spiritual nourishment that the city, as a cosmic center, was meant to offer its citizens and the peoples under its influence. Another recurring, but often overlooked or misunderstood symbol found throughout Roman ruins is the caduceus, the staff with intertwined serpents, traditionally linked to Mercury, the messenger god and patron of travelers and merchants. Though frequently interpreted as a symbol of commerce or communication, the caduceus carries far deeper esoteric meanings, related to duality, the harmony of opposites, spiritual ascension, and the awakening of inner forces. Its discreet appearance carved into various Roman monuments suggests the presence of initiatory knowledge among priestly and philosophical elites, who saw in this symbol not a mere emblem, but a key to understanding the dynamics of the cosmos and the human soul. Even more intriguing are the so-called apotropaic symbols, geometric or stylized figures, used to ward off evil influences. Among these are pentagrams, solar swastikas, symbols of fortune and protection long before their modern appropriation, labyrinths, and rosettes. These appear etched into building stones, household floors, or temple altars, and were often placed according to rigorous criteria based on ancient beliefs, linking geometry to the channeling or blocking of spiritual energies. In places like the Domus Aurea, Nero's underground palace only rediscovered in the 15th century, there exists a profusion of murals blending mythological, ornamental, and symbolic motifs so complex that many scholars believe the palace's decoration constituted a genuine initiatory path. It was likely designed to guide visitors on a symbolic journey through spiritual stages, from darkness to light, from confusion to revelation. The very idea of a buried palace evokes ancient mystery traditions, which associated the underworld with initiation, symbolic death, and spiritual rebirth. Another notable example is that of the Mithraea temples dedicated to the cult of Mithras, located in the subterranean layers of Rome and other imperial cities. In these spaces, the symbolic language reaches an even higher level of sophistication, with sculpted scenes representing, in encrypted form, not just mythical episodes like the Tauroctony, bull sacrifice, but also cosmological diagrams and spiritual instructions for the initiate's progression. Stars, zodiac signs, symbolic animals, and ritual instruments compose, along the Mithria walls, a true esoteric treatise in imagery, whose full interpretation still eludes scholars today. But it's not just temples or palaces that conceal this secret language. The very urban structures of Rome, when carefully observed, reveal a symbolic planning that transcends practical functionality. Main roads, forums, triumphal arches, and aqueducts were often aligned according to astrological and geomantic principles, designed to transform the city into a microcosm of the universe. This spatial organization mirrored the Roman belief in harmony and balance as governing forces in both nature and society. A striking example of this symbolic planning is the Pantheon, perhaps Rome's most iconic monument. Its dome, with the central oculus open to the sky, is not only a masterpiece of engineering, but also a powerful cosmological metaphor. Sunlight entering the oculus traces specific paths inside the temple throughout the day and year, illuminating precise points at particular times, often aligned with religious festivals or spiritual meanings. In this way, the building functions as a cosmic clock, an astronomical altar viscerally connecting the sacred space of the city to the eternal rhythm of the stars. And what of the countless graffiti inscriptions found on the walls of homes, taverns, and baths in Pompeii and Herculaneum cities frozen by the eruption of Vesuvius, yet preserving messages that include not only trivial expressions of love, hate, and humor, but also magical formulas, esoteric invocations, and enigmatic symbols that continue to puzzle researchers? These graffiti scribbled by anonymous citizens are vivid testimonies of a culture in which the symbolic and the mundane were inseparably intertwined, where even the most banal gestures were infused with a worldview in which every word, every image, every sign carried spiritual power. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this secret language of Rome's ruins is the fact that it survived despite centuries of efforts to erase or reinterpret it through purely aesthetic or archaeological lenses. Even after waves of destruction, looting, and rebuilding, these symbols remain etched in stone, silent yet eloquent, challenging us to relearn how to read them, to rediscover their meanings, and above all, to recognize that behind the Rome of legions and emperors, there existed and still exists an invisible Rome, a spiritual city made of meaning networks that escape the shallowness of official historiography. In this sense, the ruins are not merely remnants of the past, but invitations to the future, calls for us to recover the ability to decipher symbols, to understand hidden messages, and to realize that the true history of Rome, like the true history of any civilization, is not found only in official records or academic treatises, but most powerfully in the silent marks left in stone by the ancients, trusting that one day, someone with open eyes and an awakened spirit would be able to find them again and restore their voice. And so, with this invitation to decode, we reach the end of our journey through the hidden secrets of ancient Rome. But before we part ways, I invite you to the final epilogue, where we will reflect on the silent legacy of Rome and, more importantly, what that legacy means for us today. And now that we have journeyed together through this long, dense, and at times unsettling exploration of the hidden secrets of ancient Rome, you may be left just as I am, with an ambiguous feeling. On one hand, awe at the grandeur and complexity of a civilization that, even after 2,000 years, continues to fascinate and teach us. But on the other, a quiet unease in realizing that much, perhaps the most essential of Rome's true history, remains concealed, hidden beneath the thick layers of official narrative, protected by the selective silences of the victors, preserved in the interstices of ruins, in scattered fragments of manuscripts, in encrypted images that, like silent sentinels, still guard the memory of an empire that, more than a political or military structure, was and is above all a complex symbolic, spiritual, and cultural system, whose true scope we are still far from fully understanding. Rome was not just a city of invincible legions, megalomaniacal emperors, eloquent senators, or brilliant architects. Rome was and remains a labyrinthine city, a kaleidoscopic structure where overt power coexisted with hidden manipulation, public religion with secret cults, monumental engineering with spiritual alchemy, codified law with unwritten rituals. It formed a mosaic of practices, symbols, and knowledge that defy every attempt, always in vain, to reduce Roman civilization to a single, clear, linear narrative. And perhaps that is precisely why Rome never truly died. Yes, the empire fell, the armies were defeated, the palaces crumbled, the cities emptied, the manuscripts were burned or hidden, the ancient cults were persecuted. and the esoteric traditions were forced into exile or secrecy. But despite all of that, or maybe because of it, Rome survived, transmuted, like the alchemist turning lead into gold. It was reborn under new forms and disguises in every era that evoked it, interpreted it, reinvented it. The Catholic Church, with its hierarchical structure, solemn liturgy, and monumental architecture, is in many ways a direct heir of imperial Rome, not just in terms of power, but also in symbolic language and spiritual authority. The medieval empires, from the Frankish dynasties to the Habsburgs, consciously or unconsciously assumed the mantle of Roman power, invoking Rome's glory through their coats of arms, titles, and ceremonies. Modern legal systems, obsessed with codification, written norms, and central authority, are nothing more than updated versions of classical Roman law. And even today's states, with their vast communication networks, administrative systems, and universalizing rhetoric, still, to a great extent, echo the Roman model. But what about the secrets we've uncovered throughout this journey? What are we to do with the knowledge of the Collegium Arcanum, that invisible society, which may have guided Rome's destiny from the shadows through its rituals, manipulations, and possible betrayals? How do we reinterpret the Colosseum, not just as a stage for blood-soaked spectacles, but as a ritualistic space, a hidden temple where ceremonies were held to maintain the empire's invisible balance? How do we now see the Roman roads not just as engineering marvels, but as symbolic instruments connecting not just territories, but also worlds, ideas, and sacred rites? And what about the cult of Mithras, with its secret initiations, spiritual grades, and encrypted cosmology that echoed silently among the soldiers guarding the empire's frontiers? Or the internal betrayals that, perhaps more than barbarian invasions, precipitated the empire's collapse, eating away at it from within, in a slow and inexorable disintegration of the social and spiritual bonds that once sustained it? And, above all, how should we respond to the realization that many of the manuscripts that could clarify or deepen these questions were destroyed, hidden, or censored, turning our understanding of Rome into a kind of archaeology of the absent, where every ruin, every symbol, every text fragment is at once a clue and a void, a presence and a loss, an invitation to interpretation and a reminder of how much we've lost? Perhaps, in the face of this realization, the wisest attitude is not one of melancholic lament, but rather one of active disposition, a commitment to rediscovery, a will to dig not just archaeologically, but spiritually and intellectually, so that little by little, we might rebuild or perhaps reinvent the Rome that the victors tried to erase, but which stubbornly continues to call to us. And here is where you come in, you who followed me to this point, through the underground corridors of history, through the gaps in memory, through the hidden passageways of a civilization that, though officially ended, still lives, still breathes, still shapes and inspires. US, what will you do with this knowledge? How will you integrate it into your worldview, your understanding of history, your perception of the present? If, as I believe, you felt throughout this journey not only your intellectual curiosity being stirred, but also a deeper calling, an inner unrest inviting you to look beyond official versions, beyond easy answers and well-worn narratives, then I now offer you an invitation. Share this video with those who, like you, are not content with the surface, who wish to go deeper, who tirelessly seek to understand what lies beneath appearances. And leave your comment as well. Which of the secrets we uncovered impacted you the most? Which one do you believe might one day be fully revealed? And which, perhaps, is destined to remain forever unresolved, like a ruin that refuses to be completely restored? And of course, if you'd like to continue exploring with me the hidden secrets of history of other civilizations, other cultures, other times and places, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There are still many mysteries to uncover, many enigmas to face, many narratives to question or expand out. As we've said, Rome never died, it simply hid, transformed, embedded itself in the seams of our culture, our politics, our spirituality. And it's up to us now to decide, will we remain mere spectators of this hidden legacy? Or will we courageously take up the role of memory archaeologists, symbol decoders, seekers of the truth, which, like Rome, is eternal, but which, like Rome, is often hidden, waiting only for someone bold enough to seek it? Welcome to that quest. Until our next dive into the mysteries of history.